Welcome to this episode of Horrific History and Hauntings. I'm Beth.
And I'm Ramey. We're your hosts, here to talk about the stories that the history books ignore.
From horrific epidemics and ghostly hauntings to the catastrophes and tragic events that have sickened humanity.
Beth, what are we talking about?
We are going to discuss Francis Two Gun Crowley. If you all listened to the Last Words episode, then I happened to say what they thought was his last words and was looking into his story then and thought I would want to do an episode on it.
Okay, I guess we are doing that.
Mm-hmm. I got this information in this episode from the book Shootout on the Upper West Side, The True Story of Francis Two Gun Crowley by Rich Gold. It is a great book with a ton of information and plenty of great pictures in it, so I suggest getting this book. We have an Amazon affiliate link you can click on in the description if you would like to read it, or even if you just would like to see the pictures in it. The paperback is $13.50 at the time we are recording, and it is also on Kindle Unlimited. Also, this is probably going to be a 2-part episode.
Yeah, there's going to be another one in between these two.
Yeah. Crowley's birth, younger years, and family. Crowley was thought to be born on October 31st, 1912, but there are conflicting reports about his birth date. St. John's home records indicate his birth date was October 3rd, 1911, and that he was born in Brooklyn, New York.
That's quite a difference.
Yes, it is. The book A Gun in His Hand by Victor Rawson states that Francis Crowley's mother is Dora Dietz.
That sounds like a fad diet.
Yes. It's with a Z at the end, too, not an S.
A real hip fad diet.
She was born in Australia, and it's said that she came to the United States not long after giving birth to Francis. She worked as a house servant and was said to have been seduced by a New York police officer named John Flood, who is also thought to be Crawford's father.
That sounds like it's to be one of the names you get on Game of Thrones.
He also has a few other names, not the father, Francis. St. John's Home's records indicate September 8th, 1916 was the date Francis Dietz was admitted to the home. Admission reports read, "Abandoned baby, supposed father denies paternity of child."
That'd be easily settled these days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anna Crowley ran a foster home in about 1915. This is when she started to care for, or she adopted, Francis Crowley. He was thought to be about 3 years old at the time, and he was also called John F. Flood while living there. Anna, also called Annie sometimes, Crowley was born in March 1873 in England. She came to the United States in 1889. Anna's husband at the time, which was like the adoptive father of Francis, was Thomas Crowley. He was born January 1870 in England, and he came to the U.S. in 1884. He was also a bricklayer.
His stepdad.
Is that step? If you're adopted, it's step?
If he adopted him, no. But if your mama got married to him, then he's a stepdad unless he adopts you.
See, when it goes into talking about Anna's actual son, they kept calling him the stepbrother of Francis. But I was like, that doesn't sound right because he was adopted. It wouldn't be a stepbrother, would it? I don't know how that works.
I don't know either, yeah.
Anna and Thomas were married in around 1891, but in 1897, Anna was listed as divorced and was working as a washerwoman. At this time, 12-year-old John Crowley, Anna's only son by birth, was listed as living in the New York Catholic Protectory. Also, another little side note, like I said before, the book has a lot more detail than I was able to put in here because it's going to be a long enough episode to where it's going to have to be 2 parts anyway, at least.
Yeah.
So I really highly suggest getting the book so you get all of that information. Anna had 4 out of 5 kids that were her own. It would have been 5 of her own, but one died a few months after birth. Her only son, John, was considered a troublemaker from a young age before Francis was even born. From age 11, John Crowley had a record of delinquencies. Some of these records are 1909 New York Truant School, 3 months for truancy. 1910 New York Catholic Protectory, 6 months for truancy. 1911 New York Catholic Protectory, 14 months for assault.
Oh no.
September 1914, John Crowley and 2 others assaulted a man named Samuel Schiller. He was arrested and charged with assault in the 2nd degree, but October 6th, he was allowed to enter a guilty plea, allowing him to receive assault in the 3rd degree. He served 14 months in New York Reformatory for that. And in 1916, he was in New York City Reformatory again for 6 months for burglary and a parole violation.
This is one of those cases where the system did not work.
No. And this is just his brother. This ain't even Francis.
Yeah.
January 25th, 1918, John Crowley was arrested for assault and released. April 14th, 1918, New York State Reformatory in Elmira, sentenced to 5 years, third-degree burglary. May 20th, 1919, he was released from there. Also in 1919, the year he was released, he got arrested for burglary and was discharged.
Just like, go ahead and go back out there. There's no point in keeping you no more.
Yeah. And like I said, the book had the police reports for a lot of these also. I just didn't add those in.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of paperwork.
Yes. John Crowley was administered a series of examinations shortly after his admission in New York State Reformatory in Elmira, and the examinations revealed a bit about him and what he was capable of. May 31st, 1918, he was classified as psychopathic delinquent.
Uncontrollable delinquency.
Yeah. Some things the mental summary said is, and these are quotes, "This boy is a misfit. He's lived by gambling or stealing since learning school when out of custody. Like all psychopaths, he is grossly lacking in judgment, foresight, and good sense. He has a weak character, has never learned to control his lower nature, is suggestible, a typical criminal with a hopeless prognosis, and he should be permanently segregated."
He's made some bad choices in life.
Yeah. Francis Crowley was at St. John's home until March 10th, 1920. I want to say that Anna got sick, and so that he could have better care, she placed him there while she was sick. He was then enrolled in St. Jerome's School when he came back home, which is where his behavioral problems were first noticed. He hated school and immediately began to play hooky. They didn't tolerate this behavior, and he was sent to St. Dominic's home, where he spent 3 years before returning home. John Crowley became kind of a bad role model for Francis. March 27th, 1921, in Manhattan, a group of men, including John Crowley, shot and killed a man named James L. Hayes. The others in the group were arrested while John managed to slip away from the scene. December 13th, 1921, a bench warrant was issued for John Crowley on the charge of first-degree murder. But on December 29th, 1922, the eyewitnesses were the foundation of the case, and they couldn't be found.
He got lucky.
Yes. He got lucky quite a bit considering all he's done. Causing the murder charges against John to be dismissed. Dismissed.
Yeah. Dismissed.
Yeah. Even though he got off on murder charges, he was sent to New York State Reformatory in Elmira for parole violation. May 20th, 1924, he left the New York State Reformatory for the last time.
Oh, good. Turn his life around.
New York City police officer Maurice Harlow was on East 104th Street on 3rd Avenue on January 15th, 1925. He saw a taxi cab driving recklessly and immediately stopped the cab. He approached the cab and asked the driver to see his license. The driver was John Crowley. A heated argument between the two quickly became physical when Harlow attempted to arrest John. John grabbed the officer's nightstick and attacked him with it.
Oh, no.
Harlow was eventually able to get handcuffs on John, and John was taken to the 104th Street Police Precinct and booked on charges of drunk and disorderly conduct.
That should have been precinct.
Precinct? How's that?
Yeah, you've had to have heard that before.
I have. He was thrown in jail that day. The next day, he was arraigned in Harlem court, and then he was released with a $5 fine.
For beating a cop.
With his own nightstick.
It's like they forgot about the beating and just charged him with the reckless driving.
I would have definitely charged him for the beating.
The paperwork is probably lost, or the cop went missing because it seems to be his luck.
February 21st, 1925, at about 10 p.m., John Crowley and his wife were at a birthday party at 1812 3rd Avenue in Manhattan. The party went on after midnight, and neighbors eventually called police over the noise. Maurice Harlow was the officer to respond to the call.
Of course he was.
John Crowley immediately recognized him as the officer who arrested him. An argument began immediately between the two, and John and his wife left the party, but Harlow followed them. Moments later, gunshots were heard. More police arrived and found Officer Harlow lying on the sidewalk with his gun still in his hand. He was pronounced dead at the hospital from a bullet wound to the brain and skull. John Crowley was 15 feet from where Harlow was found with a revolver next to him. He had been hit in the abdomen by Harlow's gun. John was rushed to the hospital with Alice, his wife, as a witness. Alice said she didn't see the shooting, but she did confirm that John had been involved in a confrontation with Harlow.
Clearly. That would be kind of a coincidental otherwise.
Yeah. Fingerprints were taken from the revolver, obviously belonging to John Crowley. He would have been facing murder charges if he hadn't had died from the bullet wound on March 10th, 1925. At the time, Francis Crowley would have been about 13 years old, and it's thought that this may be a part of the reason Francis Crowley ended up hating cops and ended up the way he did.
I mean, was the guy good to his family and just hateful to everybody else?
Francis or John? I don't know about John.
I mean, he might have just been a troubled person for everybody but his family.
Maybe. I don't know. Well, if you're getting into that kind of trouble, that's going to hurt your family.
Yeah.
So, Francis Crowley's behavior after John Crowley's death is where we're getting into now. While attending public school 43 in the Bronx, Francis became a troublesome student. He was sent to the St. Michael's home in Staten Island, where he destroyed some of the property while there. Then he ran away back home to his mother, Anna. Authorities found him and brought him in front of a judge at the Children's Court in the Bronx for charges on the destruction of public property. He received a warning and was placed on probation. He was also ordered to undergo a psychiatric examination.
Well, that seems reasonable.
Yeah. Francis was sent to the Clearing House for Mental Defectives.
Oh, no.
That's the rudest thing I've ever heard. Okay, maybe not the rudest thing I've ever heard, but there's got to be a better way to name this.
What do you tell people when you've been there? Oh, my goodness. I would just say, I've been to hospital.
To hospital.
Mental defectives.
I wanted to try to put it nicer, but I didn't know how.
Oh, no.
But that's what the book said.
Yeah.
So, sorry if that offends someone. Blame the book, not me. He was examined there by Dr. Max Schlapp. I love that name. Max Schlapp. At the time, Dr. Schlapp was one of the country's top mental health professionals.
And he worked at the...
Yes.
How many named it? Great professional behavior.
Oh. The examination results revealed that Francis was not insane. Schlapp reported that Crowley had violent tendencies not short of murder. These findings were not followed up, they were not taken seriously, and no helpful treatments.
I mean, you have to look at the name of the guy who's on the report. So this Matt Schlapp's guy says.
Oh, goodness. Francis Crowley got involved with street gangs while living in the Bronx about this time as well. He hung out with crowds that were older than him, where he was introduced to sex with both males and females at the age of 14. This was believed to be because he was only just over 5 feet tall and that he had to try harder to earn respect from his peers, or so he believed.
Now, and that's how he's going to earn respect.
Back in those days, maybe one of those, but not the other.
I know. That's what I was wondering. I guess he became everybody's friend.
Yeah, apparently so.
A little bit short of murdering tendencies.
Yeah.
Surely they didn't.
Should have been followed up.
You don't think the doctor is like doing, back then the doctor this could have came up somehow, like that he was bi in the report. And that's why he was completely, what is the word? Defective? Just verging on a murderer, perhaps? And that's why he's on the report.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure this is, it's still the 1920s at this point.
Yeah. He was what they would have called back then a sexual deviant.
Oh.
That's exactly what they had.
The roaring 20s.
And they could have charged him. Yeah, they probably wouldn't have charged him in the 20s, I guess, would they?
I mean, it was illegal at the time.
They would have, but all this stuff was overlooked because it was a mess the whole time back then. Just wait till the 30s, though.
He was taught from these older crowds how to steal vehicles, and it's estimated that over 5 years, he stole about 40 vehicles. This wasn't only for profit. He also liked to pick up girls and impress them by driving them around in these stolen vehicles.
So he liked girls. I don't get this dude.
I don't. He liked girls more, I believe. I don't know. Who knows?
They just mention it and carry on.
When he was finished with a car he had stolen, he would just abandon it and move on. May 3rd, 1929, Francis was arrested for stealing a vehicle owned by Michael M. Valentine.
These people.
July 4th, 1929, he stole a Chandler sedan with 3 other people, which led to him getting arrested. November 15th, 1929, he took a Nash Roadster.
He's after a lot of vehicles. He just wants them all.
Yes, he does. Crowley was arrested several times during these years for the theft of cars. Each time he went in front of a judge in the Bronx County Court, he walked away free. They let him go every time, like his brother for a while.
Real popular amongst certain judges for some reason.
I think it was because he was so young.
Maybe.
At the time. I don't know. December 1930, he was tried and convicted. I made a typo. I was almost about to say convinced. Convicted. He was convicted, not convinced of anything. Judge Harry Stockwell issued a suspended sentence and placed Crowley on probation.
Oh, no. How young is he?
1930. I want to say he was probably around 18 at that time.
Why are they taking it so easy on him?
I don't know. During this event, even though he was not sent to prison, it is said he was a victim of beatings from the police.
I mean,
which was apparently common in those days. And I'm going back towards the book. They had a whole section of more detail about the forms of torture some police used to do to get a confession.
maybe the judges thought they didn't have to sentence people to jail. The police would take care of it for them.
Apparently, it didn't work.
No, he still had some bad habits.
And from what I read, John Crowley was not one to rat on his friends or the company.
So they try to beat it out of him.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he didn't give in, which I guess that could be it.
I mean, if you're intent on committing crimes, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. This is about the time he started carrying a gun and robbing people at gunpoint. He would target victims that would be less likely to report him to the police. At the time, being a homosexual was illegal, so he would target them. Also, because he knew they were less likely to report the crimes, he would also sometimes sexually assault them.
Of course he would. This guy's really messed up.
That's why I really had to go into it. He received the nickname Shorty by the time he reached his 18th birthday.
How tall was he?
Just a little over 5 feet. I don't know if he liked this name. I imagine he probably did not.
No, it sounds like you're in line to get a good murdering if you use it too often.
Francis hung around people who smoked, drank, and used drugs, but oddly enough, he did not participate in any of these. He did not drink at all. He didn't smoke. He wouldn't do drugs. All this stuff he did it sober.
I don't understand this dude at all. They need to make a movie about it.
They really do. They might have. We need to look into that. Because I bet that would be a good movie. Summer of 1930, Francis Crowley lived in Laurelton, which was a short trip to the Long Island beaches, where he met a 15-year-old girl, Helen Walsh, while there.
And he wooed her with his excessive sobriety.
Helen was born October 13th, 1914 in New York. She lived in a downtown section of Brooklyn with her mother, Margaret Walsh, her father, Jeremiah, and her sister, Olive.
Olive Walsh. Sounds like Olive Wash.
She was considered an attractive girl, and Francis fell in love with her quickly. Francis and Helen dated for several months before her 16th birthday, and at this point, he gave her a ring and asked her to marry him. She accepted, but only on the condition that he would change his ways.
No more robbing, raping, murdering,
Pretty much, stop breaking the law, asshole.
You should take up drinking, perhaps, or some cocaine or heroin or whatever we had back then. Cocaine.
Oh.
Maybe get him on some opium, calm him down.
I don't know.
At this rate, he needs something.
He did make some effort to change his ways for a while and also began working for his brother-in-law. He still ended up getting in trouble, and eventually Helen called off the engagement when she realized that his ways were never going to change.
He's just stuck in his ways.
Yeah. On February 21st, 1931, in the Bronx, a dance was being held at the Harry C. Wilson Post of the American Legion. Long name. Crowley and two of his friends crashed the dance when they became disruptive. Some men tried to escort them out, but Crowley pulled a gun out and shot two of them.
I'm going to this party one way or another. I've recently found myself single.
Oh. Francis Crowley was identified as the shooter, and police began to search for him. Knowing he would be sent to prison if caught, he wouldn't stay in one place for too long, and he was always constantly moving.
Back then, it was easier to hide places.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have just left the city.
He did. He could have. Or the state.
Yeah.
Better yet. But he didn't. He was on the run, but still needed a way to get money. So he went to a backroom dice game that was being held at a pharmacy in Manhattan.
Of course.
He had a companion with him, and they robbed the game. They got $263.
I mean, back then, that would have settled you for a while.
Yeah. While at the game, he shot and wounded one person. It said he shot at two. Maybe he didn't hit the other one. I don't know.
Well, it ain't because he was drunk.
Nobody at the game could identify who the shooter was, but a ballistics report on the bullet fired matched those from the American Legion shooting.
That's fascinating. At that time, they could do that.
Yeah. Detectives found clues in the search for Crowley that led them to the Lincoln Hotel in Manhattan. Crowley had been renting a room there, but by the time the detectives arrived, he had already moved on and was gone. Crowley continued to evade the police by constantly moving around. He went to an apartment on Broadway and West 126th Street, then to a furnished room on East 100th Street and First Avenue, and around mid-March, he ended up back on the west side at the Hudson Parkway Apartments. He always managed to move just before the detectives could catch him. There was also a few more places he had went, but I only added those. One detective found out where Crowley was employed and that he was employed by his brother-in-law. The detective went to ask Crowley's brother-in-law if he had any information as to where they could find him. He said that Crowley hadn't been to work in over 3 weeks, which would have been about the time of the American Legion shooting on February 21st. While the detective was there, who walks in the office? Francis Crowley himself.
Oh, he's in trouble now.
The detective immediately recognized him and drew his gun and put Francis against the wall. While searching him, the detective found a handgun. He holstered the gun and instructed Crowley to walk out of the office while he followed behind. Crowley then swung around at that time and pulled another gun that he had hidden in his sleeve. He shot 3 times and hit the detective twice before running away.
Of course. This guy's a menace.
Yeah. While injured, the detective managed to make his way downstairs to the lobby of the building before calling in the alarm. Crowley knew the building well from working there, so he thought the detective had associates at the front entrance, so he went down to the 6th floor and jumped from a window with a short distance onto the roof of an apartment building next door, where he went down the stairs of the apartment building.
Yeah, he just escaped pretty much.
Just as police surrounded the building, Francis Two-Gun Crowley was already gone.
Yeah.
Now, after this close call, March 15th, 1931, Francis Crowley went to stay with his new friend Rudolph Duringer in Ossining?
I don't know.
Anyway, Rudolph was called Fats. That's what his nickname was. He was a hefty man.
He could have been very small.
He wasn't in
Okay.
the pictures. Rudolph Duringer Fats was born December 10th, 1905 in New York. He was an only child and he grew up in West Harlem. He worked as a delivery driver for a milk company and then became a bus driver. After befriending Crowley, Fats became the driver in 3 stick-ups with him.
That's not pay well being a bus driver.
Oh. March 15th, 1931, the same day Crowley left New York City, Huguenot Bank.
What is...
I don't know how Huguenot. Huguenot. I don't know how to say it. It's spelled Huguenot Bank. In New Rochelle, was robbed by 4 men.
Oh, wonder who it could have been.
Crowley was suspected, but no concrete evidence was found for police to issue an arrest for that particular crime. And Fats never gave any indication that he was involved in the robbery either.
Well, yeah.
And if you keep them locked up once...
It's less likely to keep happening.
Yeah. Crowley went back to Manhattan after things had time to cool down. He stayed in a furnished room, then moved to a boarding house, while Fats remained at his job with Meredith and Hitchcock in Ossining. I don't know how to pronounce that. Francis continued to look for victims to get cash and valuables. Rudolph Adler, a Hungarian man,
Some dude.
was one of those victims.
Oh.
April 1922, 3 men entered Adler's home, and he was home alone. The 3 men had guns, and he resisted one of the robbers, which caused them to fire shots at him. His dog heard the gunshots and showed up and chased them away.
Oh.
Good doggy.
Yeah.
He survived, but couldn't identify who his attackers were. It was found that bullets fired in his home came from the same gun Francis Crowley used on 3 prior occasions. When it comes to the guns, throughout this, they keep doing that, and that's how they find out. This section I'm calling About the Time Shit Starts Getting More Dangerous and Deadly. April 25th, a friend of Francis Crowley's named Robert LeClaire, he was actually the one who introduced Crowley to Fats. Robert and Francis took a ride to wherever that place is to pick up Fats.
On singing?
On singing. Along the way, they stopped by a woman named Millie's place to pick her up. Millie was Robert's 23-year-old girlfriend at the time. After picking up Fats, they headed back to the city. Also, another side note, there was a lot more places that they went, and I just didn't add it in because it didn't seem as relevant, but they had the whole list in the book of this whole time.
Yeah.
Fats wanted to go to the Primrose, and Crowley went with him. Earlier that week, Crowley and Fats stole a green Chrysler sedan from a hospital's parking garage, and they switched the license plates with ones that was registered in Fats' name. His real name, not Fats. This was the car they were driving. Fats would spend money at clubs where men could purchase a 10-cent ticket to get dances with one of the girls.
That's an interesting way to spend all your money. I mean, if you're robbing a
Imagine going
bank,
to a strip club and just throwing dimes at them. How offensive would...
They have buckets all over the stage instead of
10 cents per ticket. You just throw the ticket at 'em,
yeah.
slip it in the bra.
Oh.
Oh, I'd be pissed.
Here's a ticket.
Because he was considered an unattractive man and couldn't get anyone to just dance with him for free, apparently, is why he did this. Fats had a special interest in one particular dancer at the Primrose named Virginia Brannon. She went out with him a few times after her shift, and he would spend generous amounts of money on her. Crowley was still trying to get back with Helen at the time, and during this, he made an attempt to visit her, but when he arrived, she was not around. So he was disappointed.
Classic.
Sad.
Sorry, she's not home.
At about 9:30 p.m., he dropped off Robert and Millie at her place while he took Fats to get liquor. The four of them met back up later and drove to Manhattan to eat at a restaurant across from the Primrose, because Fats was hoping Virginia would want to hang out with him and his friends after she closed the club. After drinking more liquor, Robert, Millie, and Fats went inside the Primrose while Crowley stayed in the car because he didn't drink and he was upset that he didn't get to see Helen.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to go inside and deal with all that.
This sounds like a Grand Theft Auto if it's made in the 30s or 20s.
The 20s.
Yeah.
They should do that.
I think they kind of made one that was called L.A. Noire.
Virginia joined the group at the table, but she refused to go out with them after her shift and told them that she had another date planned, which obviously upset Fats.
Of course.
She managed to calm him down by agreeing to go out with him the following night, though. Crowley then drove his friends to a speakeasy on Jerome Avenue in the Bronx. And by this time, it was early morning, so he left them there and went back to his apartment. They agreed to meet at the Primrose later that night. April 26, 1931, everyone in the group besides Crowley drank all afternoon. A little after 2 a.m., they arrived at the Primrose. Virginia met Fats out front when the club closed around 3 a.m., and around 9 a.m., Crowley was heading towards the Bronx to drop his friends off.
Mm-hmm.
Millie and Robert were in the front seat and had fallen asleep. Fats was aggressively pawing at Virginia in the back seat. Virginia began resisting Fats' advances, which made him more aggressive the more she resisted. And she finally told him that she was in love with someone else and that she was engaged to be married.
Well,
which made him a little more violent. At the time, they were on Jerome Avenue in the Bronx. While the car was stopped at a traffic light, Virginia tried to flee from the vehicle, and then Millie and Robert were awakened by the sound of gunshot. They saw Fats with a gun in his hand and Virginia with blood on her dress.
what a mess.
Now, the book didn't say this. When I was looking into it before online, some of them said he also raped her, but the book didn't say that, so I don't know.
It's hard to tell. It sounds like something he would do.
Yeah. He was already pawing at her.
Yeah.
So it's a possibility. Francis drove away as Virginia asked to be taken to the hospital. Instead, he drove toward the county line into Yonkers. I'm not laughing about the fact he refused to take her to the hospital. I'm laughing about Yonkers.
Oh, goodness.
He dropped Robert and Millie off at a drugstore and told them to wait for him to pick them up later. Crowley then pulled the car over on Valentine Street near the walled St. Joseph's Seminary. Fats pulled Virginia's body from the car and tossed it behind the wall. Crowley noticed one of her shoes was still in the car, so Fats just tossed it aside as they drove away. Real respectful. April 27, 1931, at about 10 a.m., a young man was walking St. Joseph's Catholic Seminary when he noticed a human hand sticking out from behind the wall. He approached a nearby meat truck driver and told him what he had found.
I'm just going to tell the local meat truck driver. He could take care of this.
Well, the driver went to the nearest police station to report it. I guess it's because he had a vehicle. Police Chief Edward J. Quirk and Lieutenant George A. Ford were in charge of the crime scene. Just before 11 a.m., a medical examiner examined the body and determined the time of death was just about an hour or two earlier, and that the cause of death was to be gunshot wound from a close range.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it was.
Yep, you did it, sir.
Good job.
Or madam. I'm pretty sure
it was a man.
It was a man, yeah.
It was a man. The detectives noticed a blood trail leading to the road, and when they followed it, they found tire tracks, which made it clear she was murdered in another location and that her body was brought to the cemetery wall to be disposed of. She had nothing on her to be able to identify who she was, but she did have a piece of paper with the address 499 West 123rd Street. Quirk and Ford went to the address where it was found to be where she lived with her friend Gertrude. Gertrude almost fainted when the detectives showed her a picture of Virginia, but when she got a hold of herself, she told officers about how she and Virginia had left Maine and got jobs at the Primrose Dance Palace. I think they just wanted a more exciting life, somewhere better to live.
Yeah, a nickel a dance.
Yeah. It was a dime.
Oh, yeah, a dime. Sorry, I was shortchanging them.
The last time she saw Virginia was at about 3 a.m. when the club closed that morning. Gertrude told the detectives about a few of the men that Virginia spent time with. One was a sailor who went by the name of Bob.
Sailor Bob.
Yep, Sailor Bob. One was an older man who seemed to enjoy Virginia's company, but wouldn't spend money on her. For where she worked, I would not be giving you any of my time. Time is money. Therefore, you won't be getting my time if you're not giving me my money.
She might have just been friends with the dude. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. A heavy-set man who seemed to really enjoy Virginia's company and spent generous amounts of money on her. She also mentioned a man named Harry Miller, which she said Virginia was planning to marry in the near future. Staff at the Primrose were questioned as well, but no one who worked there was considered a suspect. And the only reason I added that little bit of information is just because they were trying to do a good job. Mm-hmm. So they did that. The only complete name Gertrude gave the detectives was Harry Miller's. Rudy was the only other name that came up, but it wasn't the complete name. Harry Miller was found at his parents' home in the Bronx where he lived. He told detectives that he met Virginia on April 5th, and shortly after she told him that her life was in danger. This was the reason that she wanted to marry him as soon as possible. It was never specified what caused Virginia's fear that her life was in danger, though. Clearly, but I guess we can guess.
Yeah, we figured that part out for her.
She was not wrong. Harry claimed that Virginia tried to call him at around 7:30 on the day of her murder. He wasn't home at the time, but she left a message saying she needed to see him right away. They didn't consider Harry a suspect in this case.
That's probably good, because he wasn't.
One theory behind Virginia's murder came from the recent murder of a woman named Vivian Gordon. Vivian's body was found in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx on February 26, 1931, and the clues to Vivian's murder led detectives to believe she was involved with criminals that wanted her dead, which made them think maybe Virginia may have been involved with criminals that wanted her dead as well. Everyone who was questioned that knew Virginia gave no indication that she would associate with anyone like that, though.
Well, she sort of did.
In a way. April 29th, New York Police Lieutenant William Beresford was with 3 other detectives stopped at a traffic light. They were near the Morris Avenue Bridge in the Bronx. They noticed the green Chrysler sedan stopped next to them, and when Lieutenant William noticed Francis Crowley in the passenger seat of the Chrysler sedan, he yelled at the bigger guy driving to pull over. Instead, the bigger guy sped off.
Everybody in the car is wanted, pretty much, I'm guessing, so...
Yeah, at least 2.
And they're going to all be wanted here in a minute.
I don't think they know that who killed Virginia at this point, but yeah, I can understand. Crowley fired at the police car with a gun in each hand. Cops, in return, shot at the sedan while chasing it, and they were not able to catch them. They pulled the slugs from the car, and they matched the gun that Crowley used in previous shootings. April 30th on 288 East 155th Street in the Bronx, Patrolman Michael Keyes noticed a green Chrysler with bullet holes in the windows.
It looks like they'd have been shattered windows instead of just bullet holes.
Oh, maybe they had better windows back then. The doors were unlocked, so he took it upon himself to search the inside of the vehicle.
I don't think it's lawful behavior.
I don't know about in that time, but now I don't believe that's acceptable. What he found was bloodstains on the back seat, blankets on the floor marked Ossining Hospital Ambulance. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but I honestly don't have any idea how to. Also, these blankets were bloodstained. A .22 caliber Stevens rifle was under the blankets with the serial number H535.
Serial numbers were so small then.
4 casings of discharged .38 caliber bullets, a set of license plates with the number 3V51-42 was located under the front seat. The plates on the car had the number 6V19-04.
It belonged to what's his name, didn't it?
Yeah. The ones on the car matched Pat's. Which really, if you think about it, they should have taken those other license plates out.
Just thrown them away.
Along with all the bloodstained blankets at least, and try to clean up the bloodstains on the car. Come on. Detectives William C. Mara and Dominic Caso were assigned the investigation when the findings were reported. They found that the license plates under the seat were registered to the Chrysler, which had been reported stolen from the hospital garage. The plates attached were registered to a Ford belonging to Rudolph Derringer.
Mr. Fats.
Yep, Fats. When the detectives went to Fats' address, he was not there. His aunt, who he was living with, told them he had left the house about 4 days before and hadn't been back. When they went to his job, they found out he had quit 2 days earlier. They found no prior criminal record on Fats, though they were certain he was involved with stealing the car.
It would make sense if he didn't report his own tags missing.
No.
He should have reported his tags missing.
Yeah. Mara realized Virginia Brannon's murder case had a suspect by the name of Rudy, and when he realized Rudy could be short for Rudolph, he went to the Yonkers Police Department. After the clues were examined, the detectives were able to match the tire treads found near Virginia's body to the Chrysler sedan. And this, along with the blood stains and the blankets that also had blood stains, confirmed the car was used in the murder of Virginia. Detective Mara found Fats' mother, Miss Anna Derringer, in a West Harlem apartment. She told detectives that he had moved in with his aunt in Ossining months earlier and hadn't visited recently. She also mentioned his friend living in the Bronx, Robert LeClaire. They didn't find Robert at his home when they went there, but they found out that he worked where Crowley used to work when Crowley was employed by his brother-in-law.
Yeah.
So they went there for information.
I take it back up. That place seems to be an unlucky spot for cops.
They found out that LeClaire was working on the Hayden Planetarium, and so Mara contacted Chief Work with the Yonkers police, and they met at the construction site. LeClaire was found and brought in for questioning.
Yonkers is in the book World War Z. It's where the U.S. military made a big stand of all our modern technology against the zombie hordes of New York that had wandered through. And they failed because they brought things that were meant to use shrapnel to just rip people apart, but that didn't work on zombies. It worked on a human. They also tried different gases and things like that. It didn't work. Tanks kind of got covered in all kinds of zombies. It was a big mess. And then during the pandemic, Yonkers had a big outbreak, one of the major outbreaks of the New York region. And I was like, oh, look, Yonkers again. This could keep coming up to be such a suburb kind of area.
Yonkers. I like the name Yonkers.
Yeah.
But it also, if you haven't noticed, how in the world is it that I keep picking these stories or these cases for episodes with names that I can never pronounce?
I can never pronounce names either. Some of them I just heard before.
LeClaire's version of the events that led to Virginia's murder began the day of April 25th, 1931. Francis Crowley invited him out, and they picked up Mildred Moore, also known as Millie.
Mildred.
Then they drove to pick up Fats and returned to the city for the night. Early Monday morning, April 27th, 1931, LeClaire said Virginia seemed comfortable with Fats. But as the night went on and they were more drunk, she started to turn cold towards him. He told detectives that it was clear Fats was getting frustrated with her for refusing his advances, because he's a big old pig.
A handsy one.
He and Millie fell asleep in the front seat of the car. Then they were woken up suddenly by the sound of gunshots. He told them what happened until they were dropped off at Millie's place later that morning. When asked what make of car they were in, he answered a green Chrysler sedan. He told them that just before they were dropped off, Crowley told Fats to give him the gun so he could clean it.
Oh.
The ballistics report indicated the gun used to kill Virginia was the same gun used by Crowley in the prior shootings. So Detective Mara believed Crowley gave Fats the gun that was used to kill Virginia.
Might as well just put it to good use again.
When Mildred Moore found out LeClaire, her boyfriend, had been brought in for questioning, she began to get nervous. She went to see his mother, Miss Mary LeClaire. Millie told her everything that had happened, so Mrs. LeClaire, took Millie to the Church of St. Margaret in the Bronx to talk to Father McCaffrey, where he told them that they should go to the police, and he offered to go with them. The next day, they all went to the police station, and Millie told her version of what happened, which was
a lot of bad stuff.
Well, yes, but it matched what LeClaire had told them, with the exception that Francis Crowley had been introduced to her as Tommy Jordan. Both confessions made it clear the murder of Virginia took place in the Bronx and not in Yonkers, where the body was found. This meant the case was under Bronx County's jurisdiction instead of Yonkers. When shown mugshot photos, Millie pointed out Crowley's photo as the person she knew as Tommy Jordan. Detectives were having no luck finding Fats, so they put more effort into finding Crowley.
He did seem to be the more dangerous person.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
yeah, he has shot a few people, but has not murdered anyone at this point.
Yeah.
Fats is the only one that's murdered somebody at this point. Detectives were having no luck finding Fats, so they put more effort into finding Crowley. LeClaire had given the detectives the address that Crowley had stopped to change clothes at during the time they were hanging out. When they got there, they asked the owner of the building about a Tommy Jordan and showed a picture of Crowley. The owner recognized him as a boarder who rented a room for a short time under the name Duffy. Some of the information he gave about Duffy was he had a woman named Billy Dunn who often stayed with him, as well as a heavy-set man who often would visit.
Ah, wonder who that could have been.
Mm-hmm. Wanted flyers were distributed warning that Crowley was armed and dangerous. While the multi-state alert was sent out for Francis Crowley, he had Billy Dunn rent an apartment for them at 303 West 90th Street, and it was a top-floor apartment. Two-Gun Crowley was still in love with Helen, even though he was going pretty steady with Billy. He found out Helen was supposed to be on Long Island to visit her father. He was determined to go there and win her back. So on May 4th, a little after midnight, Fats and Crowley went to a parking garage in Manhattan. They came across an attendant named Jimmy Linton, and Crowley pulled a gun on Linton within a few minutes and stole a maroon Ford. They forced Linton into the car to try to buy them more time before he could report the theft, and they left him on the corner of West 15th Street and 9th Avenue where there was no phone nearby.
He's lucky considering how everybody else
is going, yeah. Mm-hmm. He's definitely luckier. Crowley pulled over and had a set of clean license plates ready to switch. They then went to the apartment rented by Billy. And on May 5th, 1931, around 2 p.m., Crowley put on a nice suit and left the apartment. He drove to Long Island to find Helen. While driving through Queens, he was forced to make a short stop on a traffic light to avoid an accident. The bus behind him ended up hitting the Ford in the back.
His luck is running out.
Yeah. Because he was wanted and his picture was being passed around, he acted natural and just shrugged it off and acted as if everything was fine. It was no big deal when a bus driver and a traffic cop walked over. He told them not to worry about it, and the officer went back to doing his job. He didn't recognize him, apparently.
I mean, I can't recognize people well. I'm bad at about faces.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have noticed either. About 5 p.m., Francis was on Washington Avenue when he saw Helen in a parked car with two of his friends, Johnny McCahill,
I guess.
McCahill? And Clinton Davis. Crowley joined them in the car, and Clinton invited them all to his house. That's where Francis started showing off his guns. He had 3 total, 2 on him and 1 that he left in a bag with extra ammunition. Because Crowley was in the newspapers, the conversation ended up turning to Virginia's murder. He gave no information on that topic, but he did brag about shooting Detective Shadale and escaping.
Great friends you got there.
Yeah. Helen was expected to meet her father for dinner, so they all separated at that point and arranged to meet a few hours later. And around 8 p.m., they all met back up with another friend called Salvatore Russo. They all hopped in Crowley's stolen Ford and drove off. Davis was driving, Russo was in the passenger seat, and Crowley, Helen, and McCahill sat in the back seat. They parked at a dead-end road on Morris Lane after driving for hours. And this was kind of like a lover's lane where teens and would go to make out. Russo found Crowley's bag with the spare gun and ammunition, and he asked if he could borrow it, and Crowley agreed. Crowley then told the guys to take a walk so he could have alone time with Helen. They agreed and walked away. Patrolman Fred Hirsch and Peter J. Yotis had a report come in that some boys had stolen a couple of tires. When they saw 3 boys walking down Washington Avenue, they stopped them to ask questions. Mikahill, Russo, and Davis answered the questions, and the officers decided they were not involved in the theft of the tires and drove away.
I mean, they weren't.
No, as far as I know, they weren't.
The one thing that we know of that they probably didn't do.
May 6, 1931, a little after midnight, 2 patrolmen noticed a car parked on Morris Lane and decided to check it out. They beamed their headlights on the car, and as soon as the lights hit the car, Crowley moved into the driver's seat. When they asked Crowley his name, he answered Tommy Jordan, who was staying with his friend Johnny Mikahill. Helen answered that her name was Helen Mikahill and said that she was Johnny's sister, but obviously we know her name is Helen Walsh, and she was not his sister. The patrolman did not recognize Francis, even though his picture was being passed around the area. It was dark and he was wearing a hat.
A really good hat.
So Officer Yotis asked him to take his hat off so he could get a better look at him. And Crowley complied. Yotis was satisfied and told him to go home. Patrolman Hirsch, however, decided to back up to them and ask for Crowley's license. Crowley pretended to reach for it and grabbed a gun instead. He then fired at Hirsch, causing the officer to fall against the car. Once he emptied both of his handguns, Crowley took Hirsch's pistol and shot him 2 more times. Yotis heard the gunshots and tried to move towards some bushes, slipping and falling in the process. He unloaded several shots from the ground, and as he was reloading, Crowley sped away, and Hirsch was dead. Crowley drove back through Nassau County into Queens. He tried to get Helen to leave, but she refused and wanted to stay with him.
Oh, wow. He really picked a good one.
Oh, yeah. He abandoned the Ford when he got to the Jamaica section of the Queens.
This sounds like they just went to the Bahamas.
Yes, it does. He took Helen to Manhattan in a taxicab, and by this time, an all-out alert was issued by Nassau County Police for Crowley. He decided to take Helen to the apartment that Billy was renting.
Oh, no.
Yeah, good choice. Great man right there. Taking your ex-girl that you are currently pretty much getting back together with to your new girl's apartment that she is renting for you to be able to hide in with her.
Looks like Helen would have just distanced herself from this guy. What?
Well,
was she up to no good as well? I can't remember.
It didn't say if she was doing anything like Crowley was doing, but she wasn't also going, and she was helping him hide pretty much. So he told Helen he lived there with both Rudy, which is Fats, and Billy, and he convinced her that Billy meant nothing to him, which apparently seemed true considering he's bringing Helen to the apartment that she's renting for him.
Obviously.
When they arrived at the apartment, only Fats was there. Billy was not. He heard on the radio about how Crowley had killed the officer, and Helen met Fats for the first time. Before then, she only knew him as the man that killed Virginia Brandon. Hi, I hear you're a murderer to a woman. How you doing?
Now I'm going to remove
Things
2
good.
of you.
At about 4 p.m., Billy returned to the apartment. She heard about Crowley killing the cops, and that made her nervous about him being there, simply for that. Then she was really pissed that he showed up with another girl. She let her objections be known, but Crowley told her that that's how it's going to be and that she had better play along. Get the hell out of my apartment. Oh, y'all. Out.
Yeah, I'd have walked straight out and called the cops. Be like, hey, these people have lied to me about everything going on, and they're wanted people.
And they're in my home.
I'm pretty sure this broad up here has killed 3 people.
I watched her. Oh. After arguing, they all went to sleep, while police was searching for Francis Two-Gun Crowley, with orders to capture him dead or alive. Police found the abandoned Ford in Jamaica. They found bloodstains inside the vehicle and on the running board. 2 bullets in the car door were confirmed to be fired from the same gun Crowley used in the past. And there was also a speculation that Crowley may have killed Helen as well because she witnessed the murder.
Oh.
Newspapers actually reported that he had killed her, even though we know he did not. May 6, 1931, the newspaper came out reporting Crowley was wanted for the murder of patrolman Fred Hirsch. Helen saw the papers and was worried her family would believe that she was actually dead. So Francis told her to write a letter to her mother and sister, and then when he thought it was safe, he was going to go out and mail them.
What have they been eating?
I imagine Billy had groceries that they were using. Ooh, I feel bad for Billy.
I mean, she knew what she's getting into.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I feel bad for Billy. According to a column in the Brooklyn Daily News, Helen's letter to her mother said that she was all right and not to worry. In the letter, she said that they were married that day and that Crowley was taking her to Canada that night. It actually had what was written, but I didn't feel like writing all of it, so I just broke it down into my own. Crowley said he took a subway to mail the letters, but it's more likely that he dropped them off in a nearby mailbox, picking up more newspapers while he was out. Helen later said Crowley had read all of the news to him because he was illiterate. Billy Dunn began talking to a newspaper reporter called Joe O'Connor.
Go to the newspapers, not the cops.
Obviously, she was not happy sharing her apartment with Helen. I wouldn't be either. Crowley told her to tell the reporter if he wanted the story, he needed to pay cash for it. He also wanted to make it clear that he was not going to surrender and that nobody could reveal his location. So Billy met the reporter at a speakeasy, and Joe O'Connor agreed to pay to get the story. So what does Billy do? She gives him the address to the apartment that Crowley is hiding out in.
Smart woman. You can never go back, though.
May 7th, 1931, Billy left the apartment while Fats, Helen, and Crowley stayed behind. She saw Francis Crowley's picture on all of the newspapers. The New York Daily News headline read, "Dead or Alive Trap Set at 18,000 Hunt Crowley." New York City wanted him for the attempted murder of Detective Shadell, and Yonkers wanted him for being a suspect in Virginia Brannon's murder. After the murder of Patrolman Fred Hirsch, the two jurisdictions teamed up with Nassau County in the hunt for Two-Gun Crowley, which in a lot of cases, the jurisdictions, they will not work together. They will do everything in their power to not work together for some reason.
It's been that way for a while until recently.
Yeah, but in this one, they decided to work together. So good for them. Helen's mother, Margaret Walsh, didn't believe her daughter was killed. In her opinion of Francis was that he would never harm her daughter. Reporters began coming to her home, so Helen's sister, Olive, would answer the door and say, "On your way, we won't talk to anyone, especially reporters and their dirty, rotten scandal sheets."
Oh, no.
And that's where I'm going to have to stop. And there will be a part 2 after I do a different episode. I'm sorry it turned out that way. It's a long story, and there's more to go into.
And the reason we have to skip one and put another episode in between is because we have a guest scheduled for the next week. So
it's just how the schedule turned out.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how long this was going to be.
Beth, tell us where we can find your socials.
You can email me at horrifichistory.hauntings@gmail.com. I also have a Pinterest where I save a lot of information. It's also a little bit of inspiration on where to get my episodes, but there's still some interesting information in my saved section of my boards on Pinterest. It is also Horrific History and Hauntings.
Yes, and I have a Twitter account set up for Gruesome Gaming G. Gruesome Gaming Group is the network that is all of our podcasts are on. We have 2 other podcasts. One is called Leveling Duo. It's a podcast where my friend Dakota and I talk about video games we grew up with and have been playing over the years, how much we enjoy them. And me and Beth have another podcast about me telling her about different tabletop role-playing games and the settings in them and seeing if she'd like to play them at the end or something. It's called Brother Knows Quest. You can find all those, the link in the description of this episode. From the website, you'll be able to click on whatever podcast's homepage you want to go to. You could find everything there, including a spot to send us tips for each episode. If you want to do that, we'd appreciate it. You don't have to.
And don't forget, I highly suggest you all go check out that book. There is so much more information. So it would have been like 5 parts if I would have put it all. And the pictures are amazing. You get to see this one particular picture of how many police are in this. They even have a picture of Virginia's body, and you could see the bullet hole.
Oh, golly.
Yeah, lots of
adult
pictures that you should go look at.
I'll put the affiliate link for Amazon in there. It's also on Kindle Unlimited if you don't want to have to actually pay for it. But the link will take you to the paperback, and then you can just choose Kindle Unlimited or whatever from there. that'll be all for this week. Next week will be a whole nother subject, and the week after that, we'll continue with this one. Thank you for listening.